Ben's rubber ball bounced off the porch step, narrowly missing the azaleas, and rolled toward the HOA signpost. The ball made a soft thwop as it tapped against the post and settled in the grass. Franklin Davis, from the comfort of his porch swing, leaned forward just enough to watch it come to a stop. He didn't rise. Instead, he continued sipping his black coffee, the lid on his thermos creaking faintly as he twisted it shut. The porch was where Franklin did his best thinking. It was also, increasingly, where he did most of his listening, both to the jazz tapes in his portable player and to the slow churn of the neighborhood waking up. On this October morning, the air was crisp, holding the scent of early dropped leaves and fresh mulch. Across the street, plastic pumpkins had begun appearing on porches, and the town's Fall Fest banners fluttered gently on lampposts. Inside the house, Clara Thompson finished packing Ben's lunch. Her move back into her father's home wasn't ideal, but it was steady ground after the chaos of a divorce. Franklin didn't talk about it much. He simply nodded the day she'd shown up with 2 duffels and a child clinging to a stuffed dinosaur. Ben burst through the screen door, barefoot and laughing, leaping down the steps to retrieve his ball. "Slow down," Clara called out from the kitchen window. "Shoes." He ignored her. From the corner of the street, a figure appeared, straight-backed, neatly pressed slacks, clipboard in hand. Karen Whitmore. The president of the Chesterville HOA was doing her routine lap earlier than usual. Franklin didn't shift, but his eyes tracked her like a hawk. Karen stopped precisely at the edge of Franklin's lawn, heels clicking softly against the pavement. "Good morning, Mr. Davis," she said, eyeing Ben's energetic chase. "Lovely morning, but I hope your grandson knows not to damage the flower beds." "He's my grandson, not a wrecking ball," Franklin replied, voice steady but cool. Clara appeared on the porch, wiping her hands with a dish towel. "He's just playing, Karen." Karen smiled thinly. "Of course. Just a friendly reminder. We've had some concerns raised at the last HOA meeting about increased noise. Kids running around, unattended objects on lawns, things like that." Franklin rocked gently in the swing. "This porch has been through 4 decades of kids and noise. Never once collapsed under it." Karen chuckled, hollow and perfunctory. "That may be, but we're trying to maintain order." Ben rolled his ball back and forth along the edge of the porch, feet tapping against the boards in a quiet rhythm. Karen tilted her clipboard toward Franklin's mailbox. "You'll find a note inside. Nothing formal, just a notice regarding appropriate play hours and acceptable outdoor activities." Clara's jaw tightened. "You're issuing warnings now? For playing ball?" Karen turned. "Just reminders. I'm sure you understand." She walked off down the sidewalk, her heels clicking again, clipboard held like a badge of office. Clara picked up the envelope from the mailbox and read aloud, "Notice of community concern, outdoor play activity in violation of quiet time guidelines." Franklin stood, creaking the swing to a halt. "I've lived in this neighborhood longer than that signpost's been upright," he murmured. Clara looked at him. "Dad?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the edge of the porch, watching Karen's receding figure. "That's strike one." A manila envelope landed on Franklin's porch with a soft plop, its HOA seal faintly catching the morning sun. He noticed it when stepping out for his usual coffee run, bending down slowly and squinting at the formal lettering. The paper was stiff, the edges crisply folded, as if Karen herself had ironed them flat with her disdain. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he tucked it under his arm and strolled toward Maureen's diner, just like every Tuesday, whistling faintly. 2 days had passed since Karen's last courtesy notice. Franklin hadn't said a word about it to Clara, but she had seen the slip pinned to their mailbox, a tight line forming on her lips. Her history with bureaucratic pettiness wasn't brief. Back in Phoenix, a school principal once reported her for parking too assertively during PTA night. Clara never forgot. Today, though, it was her turn to confront Karen. She caught her near the community bulletin board, where Karen stood adjusting a notice about leaf disposal fines. "Miss Whitmore," Clara said evenly. Karen turned, smile already practiced. Clara. Everything all right? You left a notice. Said Ben was disturbing the peace. Karen clasped her binder tighter. Children need supervision during designated hours. It's in the charter. He's 8. He was bouncing a ball. And some neighbors found the noise repetitive. Clara gave a soft, incredulous laugh. You mean the sound of a child being normal? Karen's eyes flicked past her. We have guidelines, Clara. They protect the community. That's one way to put it. By the time Franklin returned, Clara was back inside, pacing. The envelope lay on the table, unopened now, its edge slightly curled from Franklin's arm. She pointed at it. You should read that. Franklin nodded and pulled out the contents carefully. A citation. $50 for unsupervised juvenile recreation during non-designated play hours. Signed by Karen herself. He didn't speak for a while, only walked over to his shelf, where the HOA charter sat wedged between old National Geographics. He hadn't read it in full in years. The spine cracked audibly as he opened it. That evening, the neighborhood buzzed about the upcoming HOA meeting. Karen, ever the orchestrator, had booked the community center and distributed an email invite titled, Preserving Harmony in Chesterville. Clara rolled her eyes reading it. She wants applause for policing playgrounds. Franklin raised his head from the pages. Or for keeping noise below 30 decibels. At the meeting, Karen stood at the front like a talk show host. Rows of folding chairs were filled with polite nods and coffee cups. She spoke of lawn decor regulations, festive lighting durations, and introduced a proposed clause for structured family outdoor engagement. Franklin didn't speak. He simply noted who clapped and who didn't. Back home, he logged into the HOA portal, something he hadn't done since 2018. The email thread on child sound disturbances had grown. One neighbor asked, "Can we enforce curfews again?" Another mentioned property value concerns. And then came Karen's post, bolded, "It's unfortunate that some residents believe the rules don't apply to them. Non-compliance is noted." Franklin replied with a single line, page 14, section 3A, children playing outdoors between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. shall not be deemed disruptive under normal suburban conditions. The thread went silent. 2 doors down, Ted Myers spotted Franklin the next day, nodding from his porch. "Read your reply." Clean shot. Franklin smiled faintly. Didn't aim to miss. Later that night, after Clara had gone to her shift at the Chesterville Library and Ben was curled up with a flashlight and a library book under the covers, Franklin walked to the hallway closet. He reached behind the spare linens and brought out a dusty wooden box. Inside was a small velvet case, faded at the corners, clasp slightly bent. He clicked it open. The bronze star lay nestled inside, its ribbon still holding a crease. His fingers brushed the metal gently, as if the years might fall off like dust. He remembered the letter he'd written home from a post tent, decades ago. "If I make it through, I just want to keep peace at home. Not the world. Just my porch." Tonight, the porch lights stayed off, but Franklin stood there a while longer, the box in his lap, the night colder than it had been. Somewhere down the street, a plastic pumpkin swayed in the breeze. And the velvet case stayed open, catching moonlight like it remembered something, too. Ben finds Franklin's warm metal lying beside the coffee mug, and asks, "What's this, Grandpa?" Franklin looked down at the small bronze circle resting next to his mug, its ribbon still vibrant despite the years. He hadn't realized he'd left it out. "That," he said, "is a reminder of a different kind of neighborhood." Ben picked it up gently, eyes wide. "Did you win it in a game?" Franklin chuckled, a soft, dry sound. "No, buddy. I got that a long time ago, when people didn't always agree, but they still knew how to stand for what mattered." Clara glanced over from the kitchen counter, coffee mug in hand. "Dad, I don't think I've ever seen that before." Franklin shrugged, reaching out to take the metal from Ben's small fingers and return it to the velvet case. "Not something I talked much about. Didn't think it mattered anymore." The weekend air carried a crisp chill, and the hum of leaf blowers and friendly greetings echoed through Chesterville. Fall Fest was just days away, and nearly every porch on the block had pumpkin wreaths, hay bales, or scarecrows with flannel shirts. Every porch but one. Karen's latest HOA bulletin, printed on glossy cardstock, had arrived the day before. The newest regulation: no permanent or unsightly outdoor toys left on porches or lawns. Clara had folded it neatly and placed it, unread, under the salt shaker. That morning, Franklin sat on the porch swing, watching Ben kick a foam football between piles of leaves, when Ted Myers wandered up the walkway carrying a pie tin wrapped in foil. "Pumpkin pecan," Ted said, holding it out like a peace offering. "From Marla's old recipe. Thought you and the boy might like it." Franklin smiled. "Appreciate it, Ted." Ted eased himself onto the porch rail, eyes scanning the street. "Festivities are looking grand, huh?" "Except for this place," Franklin said, gesturing at the bare porch. Ted nodded. "Yeah, well. Some of us remember when Fall Fest was about neighbors, not color-coordinated corn husks." He looked over his shoulder before adding, "You know, you're not the first to get on Karen's list. She ran Marla off over lawn flamingos." Franklin smirked. "Flamingos, huh? Pink ones. A whole flock." Inside, Clara was sorting boxes from the garage when she came across Franklin's old briefcase. Inside, wedged between receipts and yellowing flyers from PTA days long past, was a worn copy of the HOA charter. "Dad," she called, handing it to him. "This what you've been flipping through?" Franklin nodded, flipping it open to a page he'd already dog-eared. Section 3.2, Common Area Courtesy, he read aloud. Karen's favorite. Later that afternoon, Karen arrived unannounced, as was her way. She stepped onto the porch with a clipboard in hand, lips pursed into what passed for a smile. "Good afternoon, Franklin." He didn't get up. "Karen." Her eyes scanned the space, noting the absence of decorations, the swing, the boys' football resting on the step. Then she spotted the medal, still sitting on the porch table. Her gaze froze for a fraction of a second, and something unreadable passed over her expression. "I just wanted to remind you," she began, "that Fall Fest is this coming weekend, and we do hope residents will participate appropriately. There have been concerns." Franklin lifted the charter from his lap, flipping to a tabbed page. "Funny, I was just reading your comments from 2013. You remember? You spoke at that HOA meeting about the value of porches as gathering places, especially for families, you said." Karen's lips twitched. "Well, times change." Franklin looked at her squarely. "Sometimes for the better. Sometimes not." She stood in silence for a beat too long, then nodded with a tight, controlled smile. "Enjoy your afternoon." As she walked away, Franklin watched her retreating figure, then turned to Clara, who had come to stand behind him. "Now it's time to remind her what this neighborhood used to be." Franklin stood at the town records office, pointing at a faded HOA charter page. "This clause is still binding, isn't it?" The clerk, Mr. Ellison, peered over his reading glasses, mouth twitching into a half-smile. "That's the original filing from 1982. If it hasn't been amended properly, and I don't see a filing record here, then yes. It stands." His tone wasn't smug, just quietly entertained, like a man watching the slow rise of a storm he wasn't in. Outside, wind shook the dying maple leaves loose from the trees lining Chesterville's sidewalks. November had rolled in with a sharper bite than expected, and the town's quiet rhythm pulsed with the scent of chimney smoke and pumpkin spice. Clara stood beside Franklin, arms crossed tight over her cardigan. "So all those new regulations, they're not legitimate?" "They're decorative," Franklin said, eyes narrowing as he traced a paragraph that clearly contradicted Karen's latest mandates. "And decorations don't hold up in front of a town clerk." Back home, the porch swing creaked as Ben leaned into his drawing pad, a box of crayons beside him. He was sketching a turkey that looked suspiciously like a dinosaur with feathers. Across the street, old Mr. Thompson gave him a wave and an approving nod. Something was shifting. Neighbors who once looked past now looked over, just briefly, but differently. Franklin spread the old charter across the dining room table that night, annotating sections in blue ink, sticky notes fanned along the margins. Clara brewed coffee, and occasionally read aloud from the HOA's glossy pamphlet, the one that arrived each month like clockwork, full of color-coded compliance charts and seasonal harmony suggestions. She smirked as she read one aloud. Please keep porch displays fall-themed and respectful of visual consistency. Franklin, what even is visual consistency? He didn't answer. He was busy drafting a new letter, this one with quotes pulled directly from the HOA's original foundation. The phrasing was dated, communal porch usage, unimpeded child leisure, but clear. He worked past midnight, stopping only to check a reference or sharpen a pencil. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast and a shared smile over Ben's lopsided pancake turkey, Franklin slipped copies of the letter into manila envelopes. Each one bore a handwritten note, "For your information, nothing more." He placed them into neighbors' mailboxes as he made his morning walk, pausing only once in front of the Whitmore house. He didn't linger. By noon, a gentle ripple had passed through Chesterville. Ted Myers nodded solemnly as he received his envelope, while Linda Greer stood outside her mailbox, eyes scanning the lines in disbelief. Karen called for an emergency HOA vote that evening. The announcement, in bold red ink, arrived via email and physical copy. Immediate compliance review, participation strongly encouraged. It smelled of panic, cloaked in protocol. Ben continued to play on the porch as Franklin sipped coffee and watched the leaves swirl on the sidewalk. The swing creaked, and Ted strolled by holding a pie tin. "Pumpkin," he said simply, placing it on the porch table. "My wife's recipe. She'd want you to have it." Karen arrived just as the afternoon sun slanted low, casting gold across the streets. She cornered Linda behind the community bulletin board, voice sharp but quiet. "If he keeps pushing, I'll take it to the mayor myself." The Fall Fest banner fluttered above the square, but tension crackled louder than autumn leaves. Crisp November wind carried scents of cinnamon and roasted pecans as families milled about the community park. Stalls lined the sidewalks, children clutched paper bags full of caramel apples, and the sound of a local bluegrass trio floated gently from the gazebo. Clara adjusted her scarf and nudged Franklin forward as they approached the cider booth. Ben darted ahead toward the games section, his laughter clear against the distant hum of chatter. Franklin gave a small nod to the veterans gathered near the flagpole, many of whom he recognized from old parades. Some returned the nod, others stared a bit longer at the bronze medal pinned carefully to his flannel jacket. It was the first time in decades he'd worn it in public. Karen stood near the raffle table, wrapped in a navy pea coat, her smile stretched too wide as she greeted passers-by. A clipboard rested at her side, and she flicked her pen between her fingers like a metronome. Clara spotted her first. "Be polite," Clara whispered, though her jaw was tight. "I always am," Franklin replied calmly. They moved from booth to booth, exchanging pleasantries, buying a small pecan pie from Ted Myers' wife, who winked and told Franklin, "Glad to see the porch still has a swing." Ted later ambled up with a steaming cup of cider, leaning close. "I remember when the HOA president used to help organize this festival, not regulate it like a boot camp," he said, voice low. "People forget we rewrote the bylaws in '98. Karen wasn't even on the board then." Franklin sipped his cider. "She's rewriting history now." Karen approached with a bounce in her step and a practiced grin. "Mr. Davis, how lovely to see you." "Clara," she nodded curtly, "I see you didn't sign the decoration compliance form." "It's optional, of course, but strongly encouraged." Franklin gestured to the families around them. "Plenty of pumpkins. We brought our spirits instead." Karen's smile stiffened. "Spirit is good, but spirit must be channeled. Orderly." Ben tugged Franklin's sleeve. "Grandpa, I won the ring toss." He held up a plastic fire truck, beaming. A round of applause broke out from nearby families, and several neighbors clapped Ben on the shoulder. Franklin tousled the boy's hair. Karen's eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to Franklin. "I hope your grandson enjoys his prize, but But you are aware that unattended children during official events violate page 3 of the handbook, correct? He was never unattended, Clara said. We're right here. Karen waved dismissively and turned toward the raffle stage. Unfortunately, we may have to cancel today's raffle. I've just been made aware of several procedural inconsistencies. Voices rose from the crowd, some murmuring confusion, others frowning. A few parents exchanged glances. Ted chuckled beside Franklin. Same song, different key. She's reaching. Later, under the canopy of maple trees where the choir sang folk tunes, Ted chatted with small groups of neighbors. His tone was light but his words deliberate. You know, when we ratified those rules years ago, we had checks and balances, he said. I wonder where those records went. Karen paced along the booth line, her gaze sharp, and her clipboard now hugged tightly to her chest. Near the pie-eating contest tent, Linda Greer approached Franklin. Her posture was hesitant, but her eyes steady. I've been thinking about what you said last week, she whispered. And I looked through the archives. Franklin raised an eyebrow. Linda pressed a folded note into his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. You're not wrong. I've got the original vote logs. Franklin's eyes met hers, searching. She gave a barely perceptible nod before vanishing into the crowd. He unfolded the note slowly and read the words twice before slipping it into his pocket, his hand resting over it like a final word sealed in an envelope. A surprise meeting was called, and Franklin was the first to arrive, sitting calmly in the front row. The HOA clubhouse was dim and smelled faintly of old carpet and fresh printer ink. Rain tapped a restless rhythm against the tall windows, casting thin reflections onto the tile floor. Franklin sat with his shoulders squared, the HOA charter binder balanced across his lap, its colored tabs poking out like stubborn petals in bloom. Clara stood nearby, arms folded, her face composed but determined. One by one, board members filed in. A few neighbors slipped quietly into chairs along the back. Linda Greer, the secretary, entered with her leather folder clutched tightly, eyes scanning the room until they landed on Franklin. She gave him a small nod before taking her seat. Karen Whitmore swept in last. Dressed in her usual crisp white blazer, she forced a thin smile and took the podium. Thank you for coming with such short notice, she said. We're here to clarify misunderstandings circulating about our recent policies. Franklin stood before she could continue. Before you do that, I'd like to speak. Karen blinked. This isn't the open floor section yet. It will be quick, Franklin said, calm and clear. He stepped forward and placed a copy of the HOA charter onto the table in front of Karen. This clause here, he tapped, Article 3, subsection D, states that any amendments must be publicly posted and ratified by majority vote before enforcement. These playtime guidelines weren't. He turned to the audience, opening his binder to another tab. I've reviewed the last 3 years of meeting minutes. Nothing shows that the community ever voted on these regulations. Yet fines were issued. Families were threatened. There was a murmur from the crowd. Karen's expression froze. That's a misinterpretation. Procedural adjustments don't always require ratification. Linda cleared her throat. Actually, she said, her voice soft but steady, Franklin's right. Those amendments were drafted but never finalized. I checked the town's submission records. They were never filed. The room quieted. Karen's jaw tightened. Clerical errors, she snapped. Administrative backlog. The intention was always compliance and order. But not at the expense of fairness, Clara interjected. She stepped beside her father, eyes sweeping the room. This neighborhood raised me. I brought my son here hoping for peace, not to tiptoe around threats over a rubber ball. What kind of place do we want our kids to remember? A community, or a control board? Ted Myers scribbled notes into a small pad near the back, nodding slowly. Franklin raised the binder one last time. Karen, he said evenly, I'm invoking Article 5, Clause 2. This board once passed it unanimously, to allow a vote of no confidence in leadership when trust has been eroded. You wrote the amendment yourself, 12 years ago. Karen's face drained of color. Her grip on the podium whitened. You'll regret this, she said under her breath, trembling just slightly. Franklin looked at her without anger, just quiet resolve. Maybe, he said. But Ben won't. The room fell silent as Linda unfolded the final tally, no sound but the ticking of the old clock. Franklin sat still in the front row, his hands folded over a worn copy of the HOA charter, tabs sticking out like flags from an old battlefield. Around him, rows of folding chairs were filled with Chesterville's residents, bundled in sweaters, thermoses of coffee tucked between their feet. Outside, wind whistled low through the leafless maple trees, and the clubhouse windows shivered gently with each gust. Karen Whitmore stood near the podium, arms stiff, lips pressed thin. She wore her usual blazer, but the pin with the HOA crest had been shifted slightly off-center, as though fastened in a hurry. Franklin had noticed. He'd opened the meeting with a steady voice, thanking everyone for coming. No drama, no grandstanding, just facts. He'd walked through the discrepancies in the voting logs, the amendments left unsigned, and the clauses bypassed in recent months. Every page had been verified, each statement calmly supported by Linda. Karen's response had been less composed. She clung to the idea of tradition, of keeping order, of how families move out when rules slip. Her voice had risen, cracked in places. She mentioned the HOA's reputation, the neighborhood's property values, and once even tried to compare the enforcement of guidelines to good parenting. Some people had shifted in their seats. Others glanced at Franklin. Then came the ballots. Linda passed them out one by one, simple slips of paper with 2 checkboxes, confidence or removal. No names, no debate. Just the community's voice. While they were being counted, Franklin leaned back. Clara, sitting beside him, smiled faintly. You remember the pumpkin carving contests? She whispered. He nodded. Ben would have loved those. We used to have music, bonfires. You could hear kids laughing down the whole street. She looked at him with a mix of pride and worry. Do you think this will fix it? I think it's a start, he said. In the hallway, Karen had stepped out. Through the glass pane on the clubhouse door, Franklin saw her in hushed conversation with Linda. Her face was pale, fingers clutching a notepad that never got opened. Linda didn't argue, didn't lean forward. She just listened, then quietly shook her head. Now, inside the clubhouse, Linda stepped forward with the folded results. The vote, she said, voice steady, was conducted per Article 5, Clause 2 of the HOA Charter, amended in 2015 by Karen Whitmore herself. A soft murmur rippled through the room. The result, confidence, 17. Removal, 41. Karen didn't gasp. She didn't protest. She stood completely still, eyes blinking once, then twice. Then, without a word, she turned and walked down the center aisle. The room didn't erupt. There were no cheers or claps. Just a long, collective exhale, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath. At the back of the room, the door creaked open. Ben stepped inside, jacket half-zipped, cheeks flushed from the cold. He held something in his hands, a small velvet case, open just enough for the silver metal inside to glint under the fluorescent lights. He walked straight to Franklin and lifted the case. Can we go home now, Grandpa? Franklin smiled, stood slowly, and took the medal. Yes, he said. Yes, we can. For the first time in weeks, the porch was quiet, not from fear, but peace. Lights strung from porch rails twinkled softly in the dusk. The wind rustled gently through the remaining leaves, and somewhere down the street, a carol floated faintly from a radio. Franklin sat on the swing, mug in hand, watching Ben dart between yard and sidewalk, a red scarf trailing like a kite tail. No one scolded. No notes were left in the mailbox. Linda had come by earlier that week, holding a manila envelope, not like the ones stamped with HOA warnings, but with the simple town seal and a handwritten thank you. Inside was a letter, brief and dignified. The HOA board, under her interim leadership, acknowledged past mistakes and promised a community forum before the new year. Franklin hadn't said much at the time, only nodded and motioned toward the porch, where the swing was freshly oiled and the jazz tape queued up. They'd sat there a while, listening. When Linda left, she said she hoped the porch would host conversations, not citations, from now on. Across the street, Ben played with a new neighbor, Tommy, a shy boy whose parents had just moved in. They chalked hopscotch boxes on the sidewalk, trading dares and laughter, their coats open in defiance of the December chill. Not a single neighbor raised an eyebrow. Inside, Clara stirred chili on the stove, her sleeves rolled and hair pinned back the same way she used to when doing homework at the kitchen table as a girl. Franklin saw it all like layers of time folding together. She'd started volunteering at the library again, 2 afternoons a week. Just until the spring, she'd said. But Franklin saw the way her eyes lit up when she talked about book clubs and holiday crafts. The community was hosting a potluck next week. Ted had proposed it, naturally, during one of their breakfast meetups at Maureen's diner. Chesterville needs remembering, he'd said, and food does that better than rules ever will. Franklin signed up to bring Clara's cornbread. It always vanished first. That evening, Franklin passed by the glass case near the stairs and paused. Inside, the metal lay in its velvet nest, gleaming faintly. He opened the door, picked it up, and turned it over once. Then, instead of tucking it away, he left the case open on the mantel. Just in case someone asks, he murmured, half to himself. Outside, voices rose in song. Carolers gathered beneath the street lamp, bundled in wool and cheer. Candied pecans passed from hand to mitten, ribbons glinted on fences, and an old Bing Crosby record spun behind someone's screen door. Ben rushed up the steps and tugged Franklin's hand. "They're singing Grandpa. Come on." As Franklin stepped outside, a boy at the edge of the group pointed up at him. "Mr. Davis, were you really a hero?" Franklin smiled. "Not alone, kid." The porch was no longer just wood and nails, it had become a quiet monument to patience, principle, and the power of standing one's ground. In the hush after the vote, neighbors waved a little more often, children played without fear, and the old jazz tapes played on like nothing had changed, except everything had. Sometimes, all it takes is one steady voice, not to shout over the noise, but to remind everyone what home is supposed to feel like. Rules may shape a place, but it's people, and their courage, that give it meaning. Perhaps it's never too late to speak softly, stand firmly, and help your neighborhood remember what it was always meant to be.